real honor for me. When I was asked to be president of this society, I realized that I knew so little about the IAES and its history. And when I started to ask the questions, I realized I was not the only one. In fact, many of us do not know our own history, and yet how important that is to know. And then I also realized that this is really the story of the origin of the International Socioventricular Surgeons, but it could be renamed the Peter Heimann story. And it quickly became evident to me that with the exception of perhaps Orlo Clark and maybe one or two others, there are very few people left, Göran Ankerström, who were there at the beginning. And if we wait even another 10 or 15 years, the primary information sources will all be gone. So there's a one-time opportunity to research the history of this society and to present it to you, because there's perhaps nothing more that we need to know, more important to us than the history of our own society. In the next few minutes, I hope to present this information to you. But to gain this information, this has been a 2-year trek to gain this information about Peter Heimann. I'd like to tell you his life story, about the 54 years that he lived, from 1926 to 1978, and the contributions that he made and the reason that we're all here today. But to tell a story is like raising a child. It takes a village. And it takes a village of experts to help you with the information. And in this slide, I'd like to acknowledge all those individuals who gave me important and useful information. Sometimes it was a letter, sometimes it was an interview, sometimes it was his translator. Some were his colleagues in Bergen, Norway. One was my wife, who traveled with me both to Bergen and to Sweden to interview primary sources and take photographs. But they were all critical to this story that I tell today. But there is no single group more important than the other individuals who I tell this story to. Because the story is for all of you. But even more importantly, the story is for Peter Heimann's family. And here they are. And I met them, Curry Heimann, Ingela Heimann, and her husband Lars, and Michael Heimann. They were kind enough to allow me to meet them, to allow Nikki and I to interview them. And Lars in particular, the husband of Ingela, is an historian and a genealogist. And he had unbelievable information that heretofore had never been seen that I plan to present to you today. And I'm proud to say that they're here in the audience. Please stand up. Stand up, Lars, please. Welcome, Lars. And Rebecca is a young lady making a video recording of this conference, and she'll submit this for the archives of our society. I want to tell you a sensitive and a difficult story. It was a story of war, a story of separation. And it begins in Munich, Germany on April 11th, 1926, when Peter Heimann was born. His father was a rare book collector and was quite well off at that time. But this was a difficult time in Germany between the two wars. Financial matters were very difficult and got worse. And this is the earliest photograph I could identify of Peter Heimann, around 1931, about 5 years of age. Things were okay at that time, and he had a younger sister named Ulla. Their ages are about 3 years apart. In this photograph, Peter is about 10, and Ulla is about 7 years old. But this is now 1934. Things were getting progressively worse because their father was a veteran of World War I and served as a loyal soldier for the German army. But he was of Jewish descent. And he believed that his own country would never turn on a veteran of their own country. But he was wrong. And by 1939, things became progressively worse. The family realized there was no hope for them in Germany, and they would have to leave. But in 1939, it was not easy to leave Germany, and it was impossible to keep the family unit together. And the parents were forced to make a decision that few of us would ever be asked to make, and as the only way to survive would be to separate the family. The parents were allowed to immigrate into Sweden, to Stockholm, but they would not accept the family unit, and the children were separated from their parents at age 13 and 10. And they took a train organized by the International Red Cross across Germany to go to the Netherlands, to Haarlem, where they were taken in by a Quaker family with other children from southern Germany. And here at that time I have photographs. All the photographs I show you today are of the time that was relative. Here is the Netherlands around that time. It was quite an attractive city. But remember, this is 1939. In 1940, the Germans invaded the Netherlands, 1 year later. And this is an embroidery, and this is the house where the children lived. The family that took them in were named the Polacz family. Manfred was the father, the patriarch of the family, and they were both Quakers, the father and the mother, and they were school teachers, and the children did well in this environment. But the Gestapo headquarters was 2 blocks away from the family house. Manfred was arrested. It's not clear why he was arrested, but the son, the oldest son, Hans, volunteered to replace his father. And he was taken, and he argued that as a physician, he would be more useful to the war movement than his father. So they took Hans, who was never heard from again, and the father was returned. During that time, the children lived in this house and became heavily influenced by the Quaker teachings. But their goal was to be reunited with their family. But the children were in the Netherlands and the family was in Stockholm. Not an easy time to travel through Germany. And yet they made 3 trips back into Germany, 3 unsuccessful trips. And each time they entered the country, they had to be turned back because they could not get across Germany. And a 4th trip was attempted. And during this 4th trip, they took a train. And a family took them in. There was apparently a tulip broker and his wife. And they claimed the children to be their own. But the train was stopped near Hamburg. And on the train was stopped by the authorities. All of their possessions were stolen. And because of the delay, they were destined to miss the ferry. The one ferry that would take them across the Baltic, where they had planned to go to Sassnitz, the northern port city in Germany. And I was able to locate the actual photograph of the ferry of the time by contacting the ferry company, and they assured me that this was almost surely the ferry they were scheduled to take. But by some act of fate, perhaps we don't know why, the ferry was delayed. Perhaps a wire was sent to the ferry captain to hold it. Maybe there was a mechanical failure. We don't know the answer. But the ferry was delayed and the children made it onto that ferry. And they crossed the Baltic into southern Sweden, to Trollenberg, and where the family was reunited. And because of Lars, we have this telegram. And this is the telegram that was sent to the family, stating April 24th, 1941, the Kinder, the children will arrive on April 24th from Amsterdam to Sweden. And it came to be that the children made it into southern Sweden. And they went from southern Sweden to Stockholm. And I apologize because I have no photographs from the era when Peter Heimann came into Sweden, but he was brilliant. It was said that he learned Swedish in 1 year. In 1 year, he learned Swedish. He finished gymnasium. And there he met his future wife, Asha Kjellström. And here is a picture of Peter Heimann. Now he's grown up. And shortly thereafter, they were married in 1947. The parents of the individual sitting in the front row. And of course, he was so brilliant that he was accepted to one of the finest academic institutions in the world, the Karolinska Institute, where he excelled and finished his medical training in 1954. And following his medical school training, he went north to this famous city up north. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, forgive me. But I'm told by my Swedish colleague Tobias Carling that this particular city is extremely famous, not just for medical training, but apparently more professional hockey players come out of the city than any other city in the world. And here's the hospital he worked in, where he did general surgery and became interested in endocrine surgery and essentially did what we call a surgical internship and residency. And following that, he went south to a university town, Göteborg, Gothenburg, where he went to the University Hospital, the second largest university hospital in Sweden, the Sahlgrenska Hospital, where he did, again, general surgery and endocrine surgery, and went back to school, the University of Gothenburg, where he performed his PhD. And here is it from courtesy of Jan Erik Varhaug of Norway. He has a full collection of Peter Heimann's original work, and he gave me this to take this image. And what you can see, and look at the date, I can't see it on my slide here, 1966. This is transmission electron microscopy. And I know Jeff Thompson is a trained pathologist. He would have cut his own EPON sections with glass and stained these sections and took